What if you lived at the bottom of the ocean? The hatch seals shut. You look out through a tiny, round window. Below you is a pitch-black abyss the sun has never reached, dark for millions of years. Today, you're descending to the deepest spot on the planet, the Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench. How deep is that? About 11 kilometers down, or to be exact, roughly 10,935 meters. It's so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest in here upside down, its peak would still be about 2 kilometers underwater. The descent begins. The first 200 meters are the sunlight zone, the only layer where light still reaches and living things can photosynthesize. The blue keeps getting darker. You pass 200 meters. This is the twilight zone. It runs down to 1,000 meters. There's still light, but it's way too weak for photosynthesis. Red, orange, and yellow are already gone. Everything's turned a cold blue. 1,000 meters. And the light ends. Past this point, the sun never reaches. They call this the midnight zone. Endless, absolute darkness. From now on, the only light you'll see out that window is light the animals make themselves. The sub keeps sinking, and outside, an invisible force is climbing the whole way down. Pressure. Every 10 meters, the water piles on another atmosphere. At the surface, you're at 1 atmosphere. At 1,000 meters, it's 100 times that. Past 4,000 meters, you enter the abyssal zone. At 6,000 meters, the Hadal zone begins, named after Hades, the god of the underworld. On Earth, you basically only find this depth inside trenches. So, why is this trench so deep? Right here, the Pacific plate is diving under its neighbor at a few centimeters a year. That's called subduction, and where the plate bends, the sea floor drops down. On top of that, the ocean crust here is the oldest on Earth, about 180 million years old, so it's the coldest and densest, which makes it sink even deeper. And with no big landmass or river nearby, there's no sediment to fill the trench in. Hours go by. This trip is not fast. Just getting to the bottom takes hours. It's freezing out there, about 2.5 degrees. Funny thing is, the coldest layer isn't at the bottom, it's around 4,000 meters. Below that, the water actually warms up a touch as pressure squeezes it. It doesn't freeze because both salt and pressure drag the freezing point way down. Down here, seawater wouldn't freeze until around -10 degrees. And finally, the bottom comes into view. A soft, pale plain of mud. You've touched down. You're 11 kilometers underwater, deeper than every other human on the planet. Now think about the pressure outside your glass cabin. Down here, the water pushes with more than 1,000 times the force at the surface. About 1,100 atmospheres. On a square centimeter, the size of your fingernail, that's over a ton of weight. On an area the size of your palm, it's close to 100 tons. So does all that pressure crush you into a cube? That movie image is actually a myth. About 60% of your body is water, and water barely compresses at all. Since the pressure presses equally from every direction, your flesh and bones don't get squished into a cube. The real danger is something else, the air spaces in your body. Your lungs, your sinuses, your ears. The gas inside them shrinks under pressure, and those spaces collapse. What kills you isn't your flesh being crushed, it's the air inside you caving in. And that's exactly why you're inside this vehicle. The tough spherical cabin keeps surface pressure, 1 atmosphere, some inside. The hull carries that enormous outside force for you. A sphere because that shape spreads the load the most evenly. So couldn't you just do it in a diving suit? Absolutely not. In scuba, breathing ordinary air, the limit you can descend to is really shallow. At about 60 meters, even the oxygen starts turning toxic, and the nitrogen makes you loopy. The amateur limit is around 40 meters. Even the records look tiny next to this depth. The deepest scuba dive, the Guinness record, is about 332 meters. Professional divers' real sea record is 534 meters. And in a pressure chamber, they simulated 701 meters. That's it. Think about that. The deepest point a human has ever reached in the water is only about 1/20th of the way down to the Challenger Deep. You can only get to this bottom inside a thick metal cabin. In the dark, in the freezing cold, you're completely alone. Radio waves can't pass through this much water. Your only link to the surface is slow, broken up acoustic signals. This is quite literally the loneliest place on Earth. So, what do living things eat in this lightless world? No sun, no plants. The answer falls from above. Marine snow, a constant snowfall of dead plankton and scraps drifting down. The trench gathers that snowfall like a funnel, down to its very bottom. But not every feast makes it all the way down. Sometimes a much bigger meal drops. A whale dies and sinks onto the abyssal plains higher up. A single whale carcass can feed a community of animals for years, even decades. Now let's meet the locals of this world. But first, a surprising rule. Fish can't just keep going deeper forever. The estimated limit a fish can live at is about 8,200 to 8,400 meters. Below that, no fish has ever been found. Why? Deep sea fish build up a special molecule that protects their proteins from the crushing pressure, TMAO, but the deeper they go, the more of it they need. And past a point, the internal saltiness of their cells matches the seawater and the fish's water balance system fails, so there's a biological ceiling to how deep fish can go. The animal that comes closest to that ceiling is the snailfish. The deepest fish ever caught on camera was filmed in 2022 off the coast of Japan at about 8,336 meters. A pale, jelly-like, scaleless little creature. Why doesn't this fish burst under pressure? Because it has no gas-filled sac inside to collapse. The air-filled swim bladder that lets other fish float is useless here. Instead, its body is filled with a soft, watery jelly and its bones are half soft. But you're standing on the bottom at 11 kilometers, a place even fish can't reach. So is there still life here? There is, and it's surprisingly alive. Right at your feet, tiny shrimp-like creatures are swarming. Amphipods. One species was found at the very bottom of the Challenger Deep at about 10,900 meters, one of the most abundant visible animals at that depth. This little creature pulls off a brilliant trick. It makes a special enzyme so it can digest sunken wood and plant matter, and at the same time, it takes aluminum pulled from the mud it swallows and turns it into armor that protects its shell. It gets even stranger. Here, below 10,000 meters, there are giant living things made of a single cell that can grow up to 10 centimeters, xenophyophores, among the largest single-celled organisms known. They practically build themselves a house out of the mud. The most common residents of the seafloor, though, are sea cucumbers. They're so plentiful that in the deepest regions, they make up most of the biomass of visible life. They quietly comb through the mud, filtering out the food inside it. But the real ruler of this world is invisible: microbes. In the deepest mud, there's a bacterial world that's up to twice as active as a 6,000-meter abyssal plain just above it, because the trench funnels all that food down to the bottom. The deepest life is actually microscopic. And then there's the light. About 3/4 of the animals living in the open water of the deep sea can make their own light. That's called bioluminescence. To lure prey, to confuse predators, to find a mate. In this darkness, light is a language. Sadly, even this untouched world has a human fingerprint on it. The deepest piece of plastic ever recorded was a shopping bag, spotted at about 10,898 meters. Even more striking, in the amphipods collected from the Mariana Trench, every single individual studied had at least one artificial fiber in its gut. So even the most remote, most untouched corner of the planet isn't pristine anymore. So how and when did humans get down here? The first time was in 1960. Two brave men, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh, rode a vehicle called the Trieste to the bottom. The descent took almost 5 hours. They could only stay at the bottom about 20 minutes. Then came a long silence and crude dives. In between, only robots went down. All the way until 2012. Director James Cameron became the third human to reach here and the first to go down solo. In 2019, Victor Vescovo dove to the bottom again and again in a reusable sub, making this world visitable for the first time. And in 2020, China's Fenduje took its crew to the very bottom repeatedly, quickly growing that short list. Still, here's the truth. The number of humans who've reached this bottom still isn't even 30 today. More than the 12 people who set foot on the moon, yes, but only a bit more than twice as many. And only about 30% of the ocean floor has been mapped at modern resolution. Our global maps of the moon and Mars are sharper than the ones of our own seafloor. The sub begins to rise. The darkness slowly turns gray, then that pale blue, and finally the golden light of the sun. An ascent that takes hours. Today, you went to the very bottom of the planet. You saw the crushing pressure, the endless darkness, the freezing cold. You witnessed creatures living where even fish can't go, animals that glow with their own light, and sadly, a plastic bag. The very bottom of the ocean. The darkest, the highest pressure. Maybe the most alien place there is. And we know it even less than we know outer space. So, what about you? Inside that cabin, could you make it all the way down?